Good day. Welcome to today's webinar Wednesday. My name is Robyn Francis. I'm the Smart Cities Council Regional Lead for Asia Pacific, and I am excited to welcome you to this conversation around BIM and digital twins, specifically looking at transport. Before we get started, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we meet on. For me, that is the Jagera and Turrbal people in Brisbane. I'd also like to pay my respect to elders, both past, present, and emerging. I will shortly hand over to Karandeep Chadha, who's going to lead this discussion on BIM and digital twin, where within the transport and infrastructure sector, we're witnessing a digital revolution, seeing the transformation of design, construction, management of major transport assets. I've invited Karandeep to lead this conversation around the current state of play to look at development in roads, tunnels, and transport asset management. KC has extensive experience and a really diverse work experience within government services, infrastructure asset management, property procurement, supply chain regulation, and consumer goods. And most recently was a part of the Smart Cities Council Intelligent Transport Hubs Task Force. The cohort produced a code for digital transformation of transport hubs, considering the practical use of enabling tech like digital twins for the operation of these hubs. Specifically, the report considered the role and usefulness of digital twins in particular within the context of hubs and looked at some practical guidance on the implementation of digital twin projects for both the public sector and private sector. And I think Casey will reference some of this work and the next steps for our cohort. But I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to hand over to Casey and I'll be in the chat section. So if there are any questions, please feel free to ask there.
Thanks, Robyn. Welcome everyone to the webinar. So the focus today is on roads and tunnels. As Robyn just mentioned, we last August produced a code of digital transformation for transportation from the Intelligent Hubs Task Force. I highly recommend everyone to download that. It's available on the Smart Cities Council website. A lot of different topics are discussed in that, starting from what is a digital twin and the impact on transport hubs, through to actual use cases like our Vancouver Airport operational awareness use case, and then the technology stack that's required, what's required to get started, how you implement a digital twin, the governance frameworks, the capability support. Highly recommend everyone to have a look at that. In terms of today's topic, road infrastructure, road and tunnel infrastructure, in Australia, that market's valued at about $40 billion over the next 4 years. Road infrastructure encompasses physical assets and those associated with the road network, including bridges, tunnels, signage, bus stops, drainage. It's a long-term investment that supports economic growth, improves accessibility, and enhances safety. There's a lot of benefits and importance of road infrastructure, including economic development, accessibility and connectivity, safety, efficiency, and productivity. Technology also plays a key role, with technologies like BIM utilized in planning, in terms of operations, in terms of the actual usability, accessibility. So we have a really power-packed lineup today of speakers. What we'll do is we'll go around the room so that everyone can introduce themselves. I'll hand over to Achini to start off with.
Thank you, Karandeep. I'm Achini. I'm a civil engineer, but now working at Aurecon in the digital enablement team. So I started off in construction, but now looking at more into the information management, asset management side, and the digital transformation journeys for our clients.
John?
Thanks, KC. My name's John Fitzgerald. I'm a director at FSC, where we support clients delivering complex infrastructure. Background is in construction and design management, and working throughout Australia and wider afield.
Sam?
Good day, everyone. My name's Sam Wiffen. I am the founder and director of Reveal. I come from the trenches, building utilities, and then as a project manager, and founded Reveal off the back that no one really knew what was underground. Foundation of our business is in geophysics and mapping what's below the ground, but now driving our technology platforms and collating underground information. I'm basically just an underground nerd.
Andrew?
Thanks, Casey, and thanks, Robyn and Casey, for the opportunity to participate today. My name is Andrew Curthoys. I'm the chair of the Australasian BIM Advisory Board, which is a board comprising governments from all levels across Australia and New Zealand, industry and associations, all working together to improve consistency around standards and information to provide certainty to industry and government and to provide confidence to invest. Looking forward to this very much, Casey. Thank you.
Thank you. So what we'll do today is it's going to be a free-flowing discussion format. So I'll hand over to a speaker and then everyone else will also chime in to that relevant topic. So I'll start off with the first question. What are your key observations that you're making for the transport industry in terms of what makes it unique in terms of digital twins and smart cities? Obviously factoring in major projects like Brisbane Olympics 2032, Sydney Second Airport, etc. So what are your key readings on how this should be developed in the context of the transport industry? Maybe we'll kick off with Achini on that one.
Yeah, the question on what makes the industry unique, right? As we know, the complexity and the scale of the projects, I think, is one of the key factors that makes the transport industry unique from other areas like buildings or utilities and all of that. But the main thing is that linear assets that are the key part of asset base in transportation sector. It's more like geographically dispersed, right? So it's huge in terms of when we talk about transportation projects and also the asset base. And I think and also the interference with the existing asset base and getting projects to overlay with the existing infrastructure. So all those features, I think, make the transportation sector more unique and special.
Yeah. John, did you want to also add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Casey. I'd echo Achini's points. I think a lot of transport projects are being constructed in developed areas, really brownfield environments where the interfaces are extensive, the data sources are as varied as the assets themselves. So a digital twin really enables a lot of better decision making up front. So that's why I think even more so than what you get out of BIM in a building, you get a lot more from these complex linear infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Casey. Look, I just add to that we all know that linear infrastructure is transformational in our cities, right? It changes the way that cities work. It really enhances, or it's designed to enhance productivity, to enhance accessibility. But what that does is provide a spine for the digital twin to then provide connections to other assets around that in time. So I think that the linear nature of transport infrastructure and the way that those projects are delivered and procured means that you can then look at that as a spine to connect to for future projects, which is so important as Australia confronts particularly the infrastructure challenge over the next 7 to 10 years.
Yeah. And what are you reading on the major projects like the Brisbane Olympics and the Sydney Second Airport? Is there anything that we should, I guess, keep in mind in relation to the digitization of those from your experiences?
Certainly the Brisbane Olympics, for those who might not know, there's just been a 100-day review completed a month or so ago, and they're now working through the process of have settled a site, they've settled the major assets that are going to be used. So it's now moving into that next phase of work and how those assets are going to be procured, and importantly, the digital opportunities that will come from those. Some of the major projects that we have seen delivered and developed, certainly in the last decade, include things like the Sydney Metro, the Sydney Second Airport at Badgerys Creek is certainly substantial, and the Suburban Rail Loop Authority in Melbourne has certainly embraced the opportunities around digital and around the digital twin and what they can provide, not only in the design and construction phase, but importantly into the operations and maintenance phase. I think we all have to be thinking about the data that we're generating and the information that we're using and how it can be used more effectively downstream from the design and construction phase, Casey.
Could I just add to your points, Andrew? I think the real benefits can come up front in the business case stages. So you're actually overlaying lots of different data sets to make better planning decisions around the projects, the route, the connections, the nodes with other transport modes. Certainly for the Olympics, there's big talk around capital constrained budgets. So you can't do everything. Really trying to demonstrate the best return to the state in the long term outside of the Olympics, whilst also meeting the requirements, can really benefit from digitisation.
Absolutely.
Did you want to chip in, Sam, at all?
Yeah, Andrew hit it pretty well, I think. There's that, it's crucial that when we've got a major project and the project is a particular point in time, which attracts CapEx investment, which is a lot cheaper. We don't forget that's not the big sexy thing that we're doing. It's the operations and maintenance of the assets that we create off the back of that. So the kind of handshake between BIM, if we talk around BIM from the building as a verb, like a doing, the act of building, across to where a digital twin really hits its straps around how do we incrementally improve the ROI and the performance of that asset. That handshake from the CapEx, from the project, the operations and maintenance is crucial. And it's not been done as well. And I think it's essential that we ensure that transfer of knowledge and data happens to operationalize the data as well as the asset.
Sam, you're absolutely spot on. I think the challenge that we're going to confront in Australia, particularly as we have an ageing population, therefore we have less revenue coming in looking at the current taxation settings. Therefore, we need to ensure that our capital is used very effectively, but then the information, as you say, that handshake between the construction into the operations and maintenance is as tight as it possibly can be so that we can get the best possible outcome through the operations and maintenance phase. Because as taxpayers, we're all going to have to pay for these wonderful assets that are coming through.
Yeah, the solution's almost in the theory there, right?
Yep.
Like if you can not sweat the asset, but if you can ensure that your asset, you can drop your operating costs, that should release the capital. The savings should be in the better way to operate the assets to then fund newer assets or change the capital landscape.
That's right. But essentially what we're trying to do is de-risk those projects so that we can then free up capital longer term, because you can provide certainty and confidence to the constructors to then provide certainty and confidence back into government. You're not going to have all the RFIs. You're not going to have all the extra requirements to seek to get additional funding. Now, I'm not going to say that that's going to solve every issue, but if we can reduce risk in those various points, that's got to help for project delivery and provide confidence, provides for project certainty.
Yeah. So I'll move on to the next question. What are some of the good solutions that you're seeing in this transportation and infrastructure space in the context of smart cities and digitization? Are there any sort of standouts from your experiences? Maybe we'll hand over to Sam first on that one.
Yeah, at risk of just always jumping into the underground, we can talk around what that is. There's some phenomenal projects. The National Utility Asset Register of the UK looks at collaboration of existing utilities. We possibly would have seen that we've just launched that with Before You Dig Australia here, a major pilot in Sydney, which is looking at really, if you look at eyes on plans or bringing that risk awareness up front on a project and the data up front and starting to expose the, I won't say sharing in terms of full sharing of data, but more of that risk awareness up front. That's really cool. I'm excited to talk around that a little bit more. We've seen technologies being adopted at a massive rate, looking at the foundation, the root of the motivation behind that. If you look at, say, on a major infrastructure project, as built-in of underground utilities using just this thing, right, like photogrammetry. If the motivation to do that by the contractor is like, hey, I get my reduction and it costs me less to go and do that, that's awesome. But the byproduct of all this data that's been collected from that around the QA of what's been buried and what sort of process, but that temporal component, feeding that data back and then sharing back out is pretty significant. So it's interesting seeing it done at a project level. There's all sorts of cool tech, but how that's getting shared back to the asset operators is interesting and is happening. I'll pause there because I keep talking about the underground stuff, but.
Yeah. But I think you're absolutely right, Sam. It's so critical that we get the underground stuff right. We've all seen the experience of the Sydney Light Rail project, where what was thought to be underground turned out to be inadequate in terms of the constructor requirements, in terms of where those significant assets were. Fundamentally, everything that we do connects to the ground at some point, right? There's nothing that we've created yet, which just sits in the ether and doesn't connect to the ground. So we need to be ensuring that we have a very good understanding of what's underground, why it's there, whether it needs to be replaced, whether it needs to be enhanced, to ensure that we can then have a better outcome for the individual project and then use that information for future projects to support a digital twin environment.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Achini, do you want to chip in at all on that question?
Oh, sorry, Casey.
Sorry. Yeah. John, you can go ahead. I think Achini's on.
I was just going to say, probably not to be an echo chamber, but I think the commercial maturity of the key participants on a project is fundamental to it being done well. And I think the biggest leaps haven't been technological, it's been cultural in those relationships and having mature risk discussions. Some major projects, and I know we're talking a lot about Australia at the moment, but where the end client or the receiving asset owner is taking on themselves to go and get factual information and then warranting that and giving that over to the contractors to price, not making them make big assumptions, which invariably ends up in huge risk provisions on projects or adversarial contracts. In my mind, that's been a leap I've seen in the last 10 years that's setting projects up for success early. And then that leads to digital tools being used up front with data that's warranted and accurate.
But John, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's that cultural change that is needed, right, in projects so that we can ensure that the people that are generating the data understand how it can be used downstream, understand how the value proposition that it provides across a range of things, whether it's de-risking the project, whether it's improving the outcomes in constructability, whether it's assisting in operations and maintenance. I think that is absolutely key, that culture that we're all working together to get a better outcome rather than, oh no, this is my stuff, I'll just throw it over the fence and you can deal with it when you get it.
Yeah. Now, I'm resonating with all the points raised by everyone. That disconnect between the construction and then the ops and maintenance is the key challenge I think we see in the industry right now. So that implementing or setting all of this upfront and setting the project for success and all the stakeholders know that value proposition, I think that's the way to go implementing technologies. Because the technologies, I don't think, is the limitation here. It's that implementation workflow.
I'd challenge that, and I'd say it's not the technology, it's the leadership and the people within the organisations. Like we're swimming in technology that will change the world and do everything we want, we are told. But if the organisation or the bureaucracy or the company chooses not to embrace the digital opportunities, chooses not to truly embrace and consider the longevity of the information, then that's when we face a real challenge. So I think there's cultural, there's leadership, and we need to keep having these conversations, KC. These are very important to keep raising awareness and to keep arguing for better outcomes throughout the design and construction and in the operations and maintenance phase.
And going back to Casey's question, which is like, what are some examples? I agree with the assertions around like creating those commercial incentives and also changing the cultural approach. But sometimes the hope that I have that's going to become sort of fully supported probably isn't there. An example of what's happening to stimulate this is in Singapore. So there's the infrastructure planning IPAG, Singapore loves acronyms, IPAG, which sits under the Urban Redevelopment Agency. They're going through and they've run out of room in the ground. And they're basically saying, we're going to go through and mandate where we're doing big shared utility trenches or multi-utility ducts. And just say, and they're just going to hoover up, say, water main, you're coming in, gas main, you're coming in. It takes that level of authority to say, I know this you don't want to do that. You want to go through and maintain your asset. Well, we've run out of room. We need to make a strategic, future, thoughtful decision. And it has to be from that government approach. So whilst it's mandate and Singapore has some pretty unique powers and they're able to do that, which is great. I think that's the other side of where we're having to see if you don't get that traction, you don't find those commercial incentives, you don't find that cultural sort of shift, you have to try and move the industry along the way. So there's another example of the other side of that push.
Sam, there's a lot to be said for a city-state environment where you will do as we say.
Bureaucracies come to their own sometimes.
We got a question online as well from Goran. How do we actually get this buy-in, right? Like, how do we get decision makers to invest to make those savings? And we touched upon the culture, but how do we actually sell the value proposition? Any tips on that?
Look, I think it's incumbent on all of us in the conversations we have, whether they are at functions like this, whether they are in the workplace, that we keep reinforcing the value proposition of good quality data and good quality data approaches. Everyone can tell you about the spreadsheet they've got saved on their hard drive. Everyone can tell you about the way they did it in the previous job. Everyone can say, this is the best thing we've ever done. But unless you have a cultural approach within an organisation or a business which is led from the top down, it makes it really hard to say, no, this is what we do in this organisation and these are the reasons we do it. Because we get appointed to roles where people appoint you on your experience, on what you've done, and generally, as humans, we pick up what we did last time, we might polish it a bit, we might work it a bit harder and go, okay, this is what we're going to do this time because we know what we're doing, right? Now, that's a challenge for organisations. It's a challenge for business to sometimes say it's okay to use all the skills you've got, right, but to make sure that you enhance them and you deliver better outcomes and you consider the downstream impacts of some of the decisions you're making.
Yeah.
I think you're right, Andrew. I think talking about it more conversations like this, more celebrating of the successes, because I see it as a type of insurance. Doing this stuff is a way to lock in the success of your project. The same way you try and cap your downside with insurance, this is an investment to try and ensure the success of a project. It's really hard to get people to price, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And to add to that point, John and Andrew, I think that creating that need from within might actually help with this when we talk to ops and maintenance teams, that, how they think the disconnect between the data that they get from construction, because we've developed so many data-rich models and there's a lot of information that's produced during the delivery stage that sometimes don't make its way across to the ops and maintenance. So maybe trying to understand those pain points from different teams might get us to that point where we get the buy-in.
Yeah, absolutely. And the challenge that we all face really is you've got old men like me sitting in pretty senior roles sometimes who go, no, this is the way we've always done it and I don't need to change what I've done. Those are exactly the people, they might not use those words, but they just have a method and an approach that they've always used and they're quite comfortable with it. I think it's okay to challenge and to question and to say, is there a better way? Obviously not in a confrontational way, but is there a better way? And I'm heartened to see the amount of young people who are actually asking those questions in the workplace and not being pig-headed about it, but are actually saying there is probably a better way and we can use this, because the next challenge that I think we're going to face is through machine learning and AI. And there's going to be this enthusiasm to suddenly go, oh, look, let's just use that. And the answer is going to be, that's the wrong approach. We need to be managing that much more closely, much more effectively than we are currently exploring it in the workplace at the moment.
I think that's a great tailwind that's going to help probably with the decision-making piece, because if you say your point around this is the way we've always done it, you have to be empathetic to that a little bit in the sense of what's the reward for someone to go outside their remit and make a decision that's bold or progressive, and we need to alleviate those fears and provide that. And if we think around, and it's a complex question that Teresa's asking in terms of how do we convince them, because it's completely different than where you sit in an organization around, do I want to, as a vanity project, do I want to really seem to be doing this really cool, sexy, shiny thing? Or do I want to be doing it because I'm really driven by my bonuses or the budget? Or if you look at the role of government being a central funding mechanism, sometimes are incentivized to spend budget, not to save money. And those things are a little bit. When you go, actually, why would we invest in the BIM aspect of the construction phase and reduction in costs? And because it's smart, and almost I've got social pressure to do that because everyone else was doing it. But from a digital twin piece around how do I operate the asset better, we have to understand the baseline. We have to understand what's our current level of pain, how are we performing now? That's really hard to answer those questions because it's all wrapped up in, yes, there's times where we say, hey, that project went really well, but it was blown out by 20%. But the reason we went well is because it didn't blow out by 80% the time before.
Yeah.
If we start to look at AI and machine learning and look at our databases, we can start to, for our past performance, we can then baseline, okay, this is how we're performing. Now we can invest to prevent that from happening in the future, and our return on that investment off the back of that. If we don't understand our baseline of performance now, then it's really hard to help people say, yes, I'm going to spend an extra $1 billion on that. So I think AI is going to not just reduce costs and things, it's to understand how we're currently performing is a huge piece in driving those commercial decisions.
Spot on, Sam.
Do you think there's enough information on the benefits that are going to be generated as a result of the projects? Do you think that's well understood, both quantitative and qualitative, monetized? And do you think there's a real gap there, or what are your thoughts on that?
No.
Yeah, no.
I think at its worst, the industry doesn't like to share too much because there's a lot of litigation that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think everyone's pretty protective of their patch. And I also think that the construction and engineering sectors rank just above hunting in terms of adopting innovation. So I don't think there is a lot of seeking of including innovation necessarily in their business unless there is an existential reason to. I do think AI adoption is going to be a tailwind, as you say, Sam. I think that we don't know. If you've got more digital assets, then there's more things that AI tools could sink their teeth into. So I think hopefully if we can, one thing people should be aware of is the opportunity cost of being a late mover on this stuff, because like it or not, it's coming. Every day you're not doing it is potential lost opportunity in the future with all of that data to make better commercial decisions off.
Yeah, but probably I think a risk, and I think I observe a bit of social pressure and a social narrative around AI's coming. And if you look at what Meta's done, they've increased top line revenue by 30% and dropped staff by 20%. And everyone is expected to start to embrace AI. If you don't have the capability internally to do that, and if everyone's saying, no, I'm not going to outsource that particular component to a company that's expert in that, I think I should be able to do that inside, or maybe AI's going to help me do that. It's, I think, timing more than anything, because there's a lot of these sort of nebulous AI sort of tools and processes that come out that you could spend a lot of time and effort trying to vet how does it integrate with our organization. Whereas if you hit it at the right time, you go, okay, now this product's mature, now it's actually going to be helpful to my organization, and I can actually integrate that within the business, I think is crucial from the AI sense. I just see there's a lot of, the narrative is that AI is going to really drop all of it, and there's a lot of water to go under the bridge before we really figure out how we do that. And it's not in our organization.
Definitely. No, I think you're spot on, Sam. And I don't think you should rush to the solution. But I guess my point is that having the data now means that when you get that solution later, it's going to have a lot more
totally,
to work with.
Totally agree with the data. Like structuring the data and the way that we can use that for the future is like step one. That's awesome.
And also
and
clearly,
it's step one of a good BIM or digital twin.
But also clearly having someone who is managing it and who's responsible for it within the organisation and can draw quickly on the data from previous experiences or from previous projects or whatever adds incredible value, rather than having to almost recreate the wheel in some instances when a new person comes in, or when someone says, oh, have you tried this before? Oh, yeah. Oh, we should have a look. Instead of actually, no, we've actually all got it here and we can draw on the information that we have within the business.
Casey, your question was around the upside, right?
Yeah,
the
benefits.
And the benefits. This is a question for everyone following that. I feel like a lot of people get numb because there's so much, and your point's right, John, like I don't think we've accurately quantified what the direct and indirect benefits are. But I feel like even if we had, that everyone would be numb to that. They're kind of like, yeah, the numbers in the billions, like whatever. It just becomes noise. Do you feel that was that an unfair? I feel, how would you make the benefits more tangible or real?
And I guess just to add to that, some of the challenges is we're not doing an analog versus a digital project, or running two identical delivery of whether it's a linear infrastructure or whether it's two sheds, whatever. So we're not having a direct comparison to say, here's two assets delivered within the same business environment at the same time. One was done with digital, one was done analog.
Yeah. Goran from Wiffen City Council is just asking about this question in relevance to LGAs. Like, how do we attract LGAs to participate with their capital projects? Because often they're state projects like digital twins and BIM. How do we get more participation from LGAs?
We work together.
Any thoughts on that?
That's one level, that's flippant, but it's working with the state and local governments, working out where the benefits are, what the opportunities are to share and collaborate information, how they are then going to benefit at the conclusion of the project. So I ask the question a lot to colleagues and organisations, what does success look like at the end of this project? So let's start with the end in mind. How are we going to get there? What are we all going to say, this was a successful project and these are the reasons why? Right? I think we need to ensure that we understand what the benefits are going to be. As Teresa has just put in the chat, we need to lift the capability of those organisations, of local governments, and also of state government and federal government, but sharing the information effectively and look at what success looks like for all the parties involved. So often something gets announced, let's do this, away we go, and you're running before you've actually thought through what some of the long-term success factors are going to be for the project.
Just in relation to getting started, because often we're at different levels of maturity in terms of the spectrum. What are some of the key steps to get started? How do we get that initial value uplift? Even just collecting data, managing data, storing the information, protecting the information. How do we get started on this process and this journey? Maybe Achini, I'll throw over to you for that one.
Yeah, I think one of the key things, the step 0, would be to actually lay down the vision and the goal, like as in where we should be and what are we after. So I think that needs to be understood by all the stakeholders within the asset life cycle, because we are not doing only some BIM or digital twin. It's not only for delivery, design and construction, right? It has to jump across to the other side, ops and maintenance. So I think that clear vision and goals is the key thing. And then the other things like the data governance, the data structure, as Sam mentioned before, those are those prerequisites.
And I'd probably add, like, leaning on that there's some great local government associations that effectively standardise things between local government areas. You don't have a disparate network of different ways of doing things. So I think a great first step, if that's not sufficiently progressed, is some standardisation of those frameworks for structuring the data. And then, I don't know, it probably sounds basic, but I think picking a project that warrants, based upon the significant complexity. Stonington's a council I know well, and it's got trams, trains, Melbourne Metro Tunnel running right through the guts. So I think there is going to be some interfaces and some pretty decent data already that could make a really good pilot project for the council to sink its teeth into.
I think there's pilot projects, the POCs and pilot projects, just starting small and making it real for your organisation is huge. There's quite a few questions that sort of, I think, surround a lot of this. And once you understand a case study, a successful case study in your organisation in the context of your organisation, and you might not have everything like a full data strategy sorted out, but just start and go, awesome, we did this, it saved this, and we got this data and it prevented these risks, and here's a nice little bio around this case study, and make it real and contextual for the organisation is awesome. You're never going to have all the policies and standards in place, like perfect before you start, but contextualising it, that will break down those sort of barriers as well across the organisation. Going, I can see how I play it out. I can see how that would work in the context of my organisation on this side of the org.
Yeah. So the next question is more about technology itself, because we've touched a lot upon the environment and the business context. What are your observations in terms of the key trends in the technology space? We've got questions around BIM and AI in the chat as well. Obviously, there's a whole plethora of technology solutions, drone tech, machine learning, IoT, et cetera, et cetera. What are your key sort of observations around what's happening in this space? What's successful? How do we get better buy-in? What are some of the learnings and key outcomes that are generated from these technology solutions? Would really like to get your thoughts on the key trends in the technology space.
Maybe Go, John.
So where we're seeing, or where I've seen it successful, is really, and it came up earlier, but enabling you to get more out of your existing asset base. I think sweat the asset was terminology used, Sam, quite common, but of that capital efficiency. And that can be either through robots being able to access underwater elements more frequently, perhaps not as necessary for roads, more thorough asset inspections at a greater frequency without putting humans in harm's way as often, or embedded sensors are two great technologies that are used now. I wouldn't say they're mainstream. I don't think a lot of embedded sensors get spec'd by clients necessarily, but those two technologies, being automated robotic asset inspection or embedded sensors, really will enable clients to get more out of their assets and avoid potentially even needing to do the project in the first place, or being able to delay it. And if we want to bring it back to why projects get done, if they can delay that a year or two or three, it can really make a commercial impact to that business.
Robots are thinking specifically for transport. A big one I've been using, we're working a lot with, is synthetic aperture radar. So low orbit satellites looking at L-band data, which we're looking at movement, we're looking at moisture, and moisture is the big enemy of roads in terms of transport. How do we look at that? So the segmentation models of machine learning across the imagery atop of low orbit satellites has become really powerful. And accuracy is one component of that. The one thing that I think, I worked on a digital twin project for, and I like making real examples, right? The problem was there were these 3 old guys that were leaving this big petrochemical facility, and a ton of embodied knowledge they had in their heads of that site. So we created a full 3D model of the site and wanted to create a digital twin. Just walked around with them, and this is 8 years ago, and just said, tell me about that pump. And the guy said, oh, those pumps are awesome. We get them from Europe and blah, 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 blah. And just took a voice recording and then attached it to that particular. Because down the track, we're going to go through and be able to extract that. But that embodied knowledge made it real. They love telling stories. They love telling stories around these things. It's a pretty easy bit of technology, but I don't see that being done anywhere. If you think around the operations and maintenance side and around the CapEx side, how do we start to digitize that data onto the asset? And like using this thing here, like it's got a 100 megapixel camera, it's got LiDAR in it, it's got a voice recorder, and it's got video, like these things, and integrating these into technology. So from satellites to cell phones, there's a huge array, but they're the two exciting ones for me.
Yeah, absolutely. But you touched on the really important thing about getting someone, as they're exiting the business, to have a walk around and give you the history and the insights. And you just sit there with the recorder, because it's exactly the same as if they had embedded that all the way through a project, but they never got around to it, or there was always something else put on their plate. But if you could do that, they can then share that information very effectively. You can then attach it to the individual assets, and you will get a trove of information that you never knew you could get. So all credit to you, Sam, for just being interested and curious about the work that they've done and how they've done it and the value they've provided.
Yeah, I think I was born in Australia. Grew up in New Zealand, and I've now recently moved back to Australia. And I'm learning about Indigenous culture here and stories. And I had this hypothesis of going, if every single person that was connected to any of these assets or projects could tell a story, or could capture that story, be it the maintenance guy or be it someone driving on a road, if you started to capture a story in a sort of very ethereal sense, bring all that information together, it'd be pretty powerful. So it's that you can think around microtransactions or distributed data collection and then bringing it back to the central repository for decision making. It's interesting around capturing stories.
Absolutely. But as Shane Whitehouse says in the comments there, simplicity at the start makes sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And if we get rid of all the technology, we get rid of all the sophistication stuff, and we just think through how we're going to use the information, right, in the simplest way possible, start with the end in mind. How can you use this information? When do you want to use it? And how can it then be embedded in the asset?
Yeah. I want to talk about BIM technology in particular, because that's a big topic in the design, architecture, planning phases as well. What are your thoughts on BIM in particular in terms of digital operations and handovers? Any observations around BIM?
They're critical, right? But we've got to use it effectively through the process, and we've got to have a willing operations and maintenance group who has been involved and understands the value proposition, who can then pick it up and utilise it. So often, and we've seen this time and time again, the design and constructors come in, they design a fantastic asset, the constructors deliver a fantastic asset, and then right at the end, the ops and maintenance guys come in and they go, what did they do that for? I wouldn't have done it that way. Oh, look, we'll have to go out and rescan it all, or we'll just have to go and do our own measurements, or we'll just have to go and check this stuff. Instead of, as Achini said at the beginning, integrating those groups right up front in the project so they can have a good understanding of what's being delivered through into their operations and maintenance phase.
What, like, I think good panel is dynamic. What's your favourite example of where a BIM model or the BIM that's been adopted heavily at the construction phase has then been adopted into the operations and maintenance? Because I just don't see that happening a lot. What would be your favourite one?
I worked on a couple of projects which are still being delivered, and that's the challenge. Like some of the major transport infrastructure projects they're a long time to be delivered, and then there'll be a long time in operations. But it's about setting those foundations up to ensure that the information is then handed over effectively. Now, history will record whether the foundational elements that we've set up actually deliver the outcomes through the ops and maintenance life cycle of the assets. I'm confident that it can, but history will record whether I'm right.
Yeah. Can't help but feel that was a loaded question, Sam. I'd have the same answer as Andrew. I haven't seen it done well, and that is a function of the length of these projects, but also I think the maturity of a lot of the receiving organisations as well.
Yeah. And it would be true to say that BIM, in the sense that we understand how we do BIM on a project, there might not be the most appropriate sort of asset management or facilities management type BIM solution there, and you could call it the same thing. But the wealth of data that you've got inside your BIM model or systems or practices being deployed in the O&M phase, that's like I'm seeking that.
Yeah, it requires also an upskilling of that asset owner's team at times, because it'll be a complete, if they have to start going into a model to find the operation and maintenance manual or the ITPs or other bits of information on an asset that is vastly different to what they did the year prior. It's quite an organisational change.
Yeah.
Sorry, Casey, can I just say that we all bring experience, our own personal experience, to the professional roles that we have. So there'll be lots of people who've done a house renovation or built a new place or whatever. And it's fascinating to me to look at how poorly the information that we have in our daily lives gets used and retained, and then to improve the ongoing operations and maintenance of a dwelling that we might live in, where we have a much higher vested interest in its success than we sometimes might have in our professional lives.
Yeah. Just in relation to the procurement and the supply chain side of things when it comes to construction, obviously government plays a key role in this space as well. I just wanted to get your observations on contractual models and reading that space. Is there anything that can be improved, or is that all running sleekly, which I don't think it is? But interested to understand.
Okay, so you jest, don't you? Let's just throw this one in.
Yeah.
You're speaking from experience, Casey. I'll go, because I used to work for a large consulting firm, and I used to get real big pats on the back if I turned my $1 million fee into a $4 million fee. So the shifting of risk around what's that, and this isn't throwing rocks, but this is my usual sort of shin kicking that I give everyone, so no one's special. But in terms of the motivation around how do we do that, if the maturity of principles in the contractual models that could accommodate for the sharing of risk was there, I'd say we'd see a lot more. Hey, it's really important that this risk does not manifest. Hey, look, we're going to go and do that, and we're good at what we do, and we'll be measured by actually being good at what we do, as opposed to shifting all the risk back to you. It's hard, right? There's lots of different economic challenges that we're facing off the back of COVID, and not really knowing what's around the corner, and it's easier to quantify what's measurable. But understanding the risk, and if there's contractual models that can accommodate for that, I don't see happening. And I'd say there's a huge money being left on the table if you can start to incentivize people to really bring value, as opposed to cover your own tail by signing a contract that's always been signed that way and just go, I'm just going to outsource that to professionals at an hourly rate.
I think, that's probably a symptom of picking the cheapest price, which government unfortunately probably gets forced to do more often than it would like. I think that risk sharing, but risk realization, like understanding what are we trying to solve here? Because I think too often I've seen it become the project scope and requirement says we have to do it, rather than is it adding value in this particular instance? And what's it trying to do? What's it going to give us that we otherwise wouldn't have? I think that the best way clients could, the government in particular, Casey, to your question, is upskilling its own people in the benefits of these tools and really honing it back to what are we using it to solve? Why are we doing it, rather than, oh, we said we're going to do it, so we've got to do it.
Yeah.
And also a long-term commitment to it, right? Because we've all experienced when we're working client side that the different faces change across the meeting room from the government or from whoever it might be. And then we have to go back and say, oh, yeah, this is what we've done. This is why we've done it. And, oh, yeah, this is the approach we need to be taking. And they come and go, oh, really? I would have done a different way to that. And then that just adds further to some of the risk conversation. It adds to the uncertainty. And what we want, fundamentally, we want organisations to be profitable and to exist and then to invest in improved productivity outcomes. That's what we all fundamentally want. It's just the way that organisations go about that and the way that governments transfer risk has made it problematic in the past.
Yeah. The next question is more around differentiating organizations. Like, what is cutting edge? How do you become a leading player in this space? What should be done to have the optimal team, the optimal culture? How are we differentiating organizations in this industry? Keen to get your thoughts.
I guess, Casey, I might start with a bit of a historical approach. Lang O'Rourke in the UK in the early 2000s, the CEO and the board took a decision to have a digital first approach, right? And that led a whole lot of then decisions within the business about the way they would contract, about the way they'd approach things, about the investment decisions they would make. So it was a bit of a leap of faith when they started to do it because they were the only ones doing it. And then quickly they were able to get derived benefits, quickly they were able to reduce risk, quickly they were able to provide certainty around costings. And suddenly the industry all went, oh, if they're doing it, and that way, maybe we should all start doing it. So I think it takes, again, leadership. It takes confidence in the approach you're going to pursue. But it also needs to be then supported with good contracts, which will come up again and again, because what we want is repeatability at one level. And then showing those clear examples of success and how the benefits accrue. Now, the challenge, of course, in a commercial environment is you don't want to lay out all your success factors because then your competition is just going to copy them and go, oh, yeah, we can do this better. But I think the challenge that we all face is how we are able to talk about success in a way which demonstrates the value to the delivery agency or the value to the client.
I think that's a great couple of points there, Andrew. I'd probably go on a different tact. I think the way to be leading edge on this is all of the companies that work in the value chain of transport infrastructure are people businesses. And that's why I think it starts with your people, and it's setting that culture, working with people in your business to get them to understand, because it is a change of doing things potentially. And I don't want to go straight to the technology, but even just, we've talked about risk, we've talked about the contract models, we've talked about the relationships between counterparties. I think starting with the people and building that kind of appetite to adopt these tools and use them in their data, and probably not trying to take on everything at once. Maybe 20-something years ago, picking something and doing it well. And it might be that you use it for asset handover at the end of a project if you're a contractor, or if you're a consultant up front, you offer things up in a digital platform that is readily usable and warranted by a contractor. I think that's the way to differentiate. And certainly how, speaking as a business person myself, really trying to do it in my own business.
If I add, sorry, Sam, if I add something small, John, there. So, yeah, you mentioned about the technology adoption. Can you still hear me? All right.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think one of the key things is that not try and adopt technologies and tools too soon, rather than understanding your requirements, the functional requirements first. So that's, I think, one of the key places where these kind of implementations don't go quite well, because we implement a tool and then we assume that it will solve all our problems. So trying to think what exactly we are after and the functional requirements that we are after for each of these technologies or tools can be a good place to start.
Absolutely.
I like that too. And I think in terms of what does good look like, or what does probably go, rather than the tech side or go to the high level, you go, the best cases I see is where there's like a counter or something on a website where they say, we did this thing and here's how much water we're saving, or here's how much travel time we're saving. And the digital counter, so everyone can see that. That's awesome. But that means that you need to have a certain level of accountability or vulnerability to say, we weren't going great before, and we did this thing, and we're now getting this outcome. And that sort of vulnerability is hard for organizations to say, we're not as optimal there. You need to really look at that. But when you start to see, and it doesn't matter what the technology is or what the system is, if you say, here's the evidence, this is the water that we're saving, or the travel time that we're saving, or the disruptions that we've saved, that's really where you can see, awesome, great, that's a real worthwhile investment and business that actually understands the returns you're getting.
Yeah. Sorry for the technical disruption before. Just in terms of I guess the final question is just around like Australia in the APAC region and Middle East, etc. How are we seeing Australia in terms of technology adoption, in terms of transportation maturity? What are your observations? Are we lagging behind or are we leading the way? Like, where are we in the spectrum from what you've experienced?
I think that there are some pockets. Yeah, that's right. That's what I was going to say, John. There are some pockets which are doing really well, and you look at them and go, this is fantastic. There are others that are just dipping their toe in the water and are lagging a bit, which then is impacting the rest of us. One of the things that ABAB we're trying to do is to get all boats to rise together. So how do we use that tide to lift capability, to provide confidence, to provide certainty, so that we can get better outcomes for the infrastructure that we all need and will need into the future?
I'd add that I think there's pockets of brilliance, and there's companies who are really leading the way in areas. But I'd say that we've got some work to do, maybe at an organisational level as a country, talking about Australia, to probably catch some of the faster movers in other parts of the world in terms of setting the appropriate frameworks and landscape in the industry.
Yeah. Achini?
Yeah. So yeah, and it resonates with both Andrew and John. So we are for sure, I think, we're close to leading, I would say. Obviously, we still have, there are some pockets that has to come to this level that we want to. But obviously, I see that need to do better and the need to implement all of these things across the various sectors in Australia, at least. And I think we can set examples in terms of transportation sector, but obviously that transformation from construction to ops and maintenance, yeah, I'm yet to experience that myself too.
Yeah. So look, thanks everyone for your time. Really insightful discussion. I know we're 3 minutes over one as well, Robyn. Just a call out to anyone that would be interested to join the Intelligent Transport Task Force. Feel free to get in touch with Robyn or myself. We are looking at the next stages of that and how we drive that forward. Yeah, really want to thank the speakers today for their very insightful and deep discussions. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Casey, and thank you to our panelists. And just to exactly to your point, close the loop. Now that we've published this report, we're figuring out what the next stage is to keep this capability uplift going and get use cases in a central place, hopefully, which seems to be a big call in the chat. So encourage anyone to or have thoughts on what this next tranche of work is going to look like. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.